Oh, hello, Anita Brown. It's good to see you. It's good to see everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Andy Land in the house as well. What I'm going to do straight away, Saul's failure, is make sure that I keep my desk tidy as per usual. Because if we're going to cover the ground that I have intended for us, then I would say we are going to need this one here for now. We're going to need all the frames to be pretty clean and clear. Sheila Broad, hey, it's good to see you. Hand hearts back to you, Andy Land. Right, we are live. I can't tell you that. I'm very relieved. I'm still sort of a little bit in the PTSD form of last week, but we are live. So we'll get into the swing and the groove of things. Robbie, good to see you. Back in a minute. That's fine. We'll be here for a minute. And what I'm going to do is try and sporadically put the link into the chat so that anybody can sort of take the opportunity at random to hop up onto the stream. I would like to encourage anybody to sit up here with me while we go through things, throw in their input. If you don't want to just be in the chat itself, you're welcome to come up. I'm going to try and do that regularly without losing track of what I'm going to be trying to achieve here. Keeping us company in the background as I'm trying to switch from screen to screen will be my Orangus mysticidi, which was in gorgeous bloom a while ago. And you can see I'm repeating the word trying because I've got a lot going on, a lot open here. And yeah, I hope I don't crash the system. So we are here tonight, hopefully, to be able to preempt and hopefully avoid, and if necessary, intervene and save orchids that may come up against something untoward that would cause them eventually to leave our collection. I see a lot of these videos on the internet. It's always about beginner orchid care, and I feel that is very, kind of excludes everybody else. Sweet God. Goodness me, it's good to see you. Very early where you are. Thank you so much for being here on your weekend night, having a night out with us here on Ninja Orchids. That's awesome. Welcome. So beginner orchid care can be misleading because, you know, it happens to everybody at any given time and not necessarily just beginners. So one of the questions I always see, not on my videos, but around the interwebs, is why orchids die. While there are plenty of reasons that are very unfortunate, we always celebrate our blooms because they are not to be taken for granted. There's so much that can happen in between 11 months for when they do bloom. Let's see, I know I was just trying to calculate while talking, which didn't work out. So thank you for putting that time in there. You're very much appreciated. So I've come up with 14 reasons. I know. I've tried to be a little bit, try to consolidate them into 14, and let's see how we go. If this is going to be as interactive as I'm hoping it's going to be, there will be some breaks, interruptions, discussions, Q&As. Highlight my name using the channel name Ninja Orchids, or you can highlight comment really brightly by putting in a super chat, and that'll come up in a bright color. I will also see that and appreciate the support for the orchids very much. Oh, Michael, I am so sorry. Sounds like you and I are matching 3 out of 3. Yeah, sounds about right with me as well. But anyway, I've come up with 14 reasons. If we only get through 7 today, fear not. A Thursday is around the corner. Time flies when we're having fun, and we can do the other 7 next time. So why do orchids die and how to fix things or avoid them altogether? Well, the question itself, there's no straightforward answer for why orchids die. That's why we're doing a live stream. Otherwise, probably a video is going to be, I would say, probably a little bit much if I were to do it all in one bit. In actual fact, I should break this live down into every single component, but the live gives me an opportunity to see your thoughts on this subject matter depending on as we go through the points. Anyway, when we have our orchids long enough, we can somewhat gauge and recognize certain signals and think, oh no, this is not normal. When an orchid is brand new, we don't know if it's normal or not, but we can try to start to analyze and hopefully get a correct diagnosis straight away, because if we do not get a correct diagnosis straight away, but we intervene with something else, even though we tried to do something else, if it wasn't correct, it's going to go downhill faster than it would ever recover with a correct diagnosis. Galeotia fimbriata has a spike. We always look on the bright side of life with this hobby, Michael, for sure. So yeah, unfortunately, a reoccurring theme with the orchid hobby is that our orchids grow slowly, their metabolism is slow. That means recovery is much slower than decline, unfortunately. Anyway, the most significant concern we have to have is in our orchid care is if the plant begins to change a healthy appearance, and that can happen overnight, as we say, because everybody looks at their collection regularly. Another saying that we say a lot is it came out of the blue, literally. I've had that happen as well. And true story, I mean, nobody here sort of ignores an orchid and lets it go downhill, and then 4 months later we look at it and go, oh my goodness, why did this happen? But we can look at some signals, like signs that alarm us are premature blooms dropping, leaves turning yellow that shouldn't be, leaves showing spotting that wasn't there before, wilting, dead roots, and so on and so forth. The list is endless. The reasons for that being the case we will go through. It makes no difference if we have been caring for the orchid for a long time. While that is an advantage, it is, if it's new to our collection, the alarm bells ring even louder and the mind goes into troubleshooting and diagnosis mode, as it should. The sooner we accurately determine what is going on, the higher our chances at successfully saving the orchid. But even if the diagnosis is correct, there's no guarantee that the steps we take will be successful, unfortunately. While decline can be observed and intervention can be implemented, as mentioned, being slow growers compared to other plants, recovering can be long and arduous, and success is not guaranteed. Then, of course, the downside of treating a diagnosis that is incorrect does not give us enough time to change the diagnosis either, because the energy within any storage organs is depleted. If we are dealing with sympodial orchids and with monopodial orchids who do not have storage organs beyond their leaves, and they are, in my opinions, the hardest to bring back from something that was intent on taking the orchid out. Now, I have a few pointers I would like to discuss. Some may be obvious and bring a yawn to the demeanor of orchid growers that have been in this hobby for decades, but because there are so many variables and factors that determine the hobby, environments, setups, media, that the experience of each individual grower can differ based on these factors, and those are the experience I would like to tap into. Because I may say one thing, and based on the variables of a different environment or media, the experience elsewhere may be completely different. So yes, the first link has been dropped in the description. Change the lingo. The first link has been dropped into the chat. Know that you could always jump on board. Okay, let me just check my notes here just to make sure I stay on track, because word salad have no calories, but they can be hard to digest. Okay, all right, let's just start with the first one. Why don't we just get the first one out of the way? And I'm going to see if I can put up at least a little bit of a picture that gives us an idea of where we are headed. And maybe you can ascertain and discern what I'm going to be talking about. Let me remove you. I can see that this is going to be quite the desktop DJ night. Anyway, This is my example for when I discuss inadequate watering. Inadequate would include too little and too much. And we do say we overwater our orchids. That is all relative because of our setups. But you can determine the amount of moisture your pot still has in it by assessing the pot from the outside if you are using clear containers. Of course, excessive watering locks out air depending if the media compacts. The roots suffocate, no air exchange, boom, they die. And my classic example here is an Oncostella wildcat that I rescued and then I put it back into this state because of inadequate watering in lecker and self-watering. Can you believe it? That is because I dropped the ball and she was growing so well, I was beyond the point of thinking she needed extra special attention, and I didn't realize how much water this orchid required, and boom, I put her back into rescue mode. So making sure that there is enough water for your orchids is dependent, of course, with regards to your setup. So if you're not using clear containers, you can go by the weight of the pot. If you're new to using containers that are not clear, then understanding the weight of the pot after the first watering. Same if your setup is in semi-hydroponics, the weight will give you the idea as to whether you need to water or not. This is referring to not clear containers, because a lot of times you will see in my videos, I do not use clear containers. And if you use clear containers, everything's pretty much clear to see, including condensation. Now, while your reservoir or your water might, your dish or whatever it is that you have underneath your pot, if your container is still showing condensation, if you use a clear container, that means there's still enough moisture in the media. You don't need to water. And now I'm addressing a wet-dry cycle. Whereas in semi-hydro, if your reservoir is empty and you see condensation, you can say just about the same thing, depending on what season it is and what your orchid is doing. So in not clear containers, the weight is what I go by. I also jiggle my pots so that I do not have to lift every mask off of the pot to check my reservoir. A slight jiggle will tell me if I still have water in the reservoir because it makes a sloshing sound. I am confident that I know by the weight of my pots without having to jiggle them if they need watering or not. But enter my example of my Oncostelle. Sometimes the pot does feel heavier than I perceive it to be from the last time. And if there's no sloshing sound, I then now do check the mass, because the increase in weight without the sloshing sound then confirms that there is no water in the reservoir, tells me that the orchid has been busy growing roots, which have added weight to the pot. So, hey, up the ante on the watering and fill the reservoir. When it comes to orchids for which the media should never dry out, there's no such thing as too much water. However, in cases of temperature drop, I would advise against going with the X day as watering day. If the pot is still wet enough, too much watering could become an issue long term. So in that case, I would hold off sticking to a set watering day and hold off just to be on the safe side. Now, while these kinds of orchids do not want their media to dry out, they do not want the media to be sopping wet on a continuous basis either. And I'm referring to orchids that grow in sphagnum moss that like to have their roots always continuously wet. And yeah, your temperature will determine if you're going to stick to your specified watering day or not, because even though those roots don't want to be dry, they will get drowned out if they're sopping wet for too long. And I hope that makes sense. And I see Dania Tortelli has entered the building. Good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Sheila Broad, wet-dry cycle. How long should your orchid be dry? That depends on the size of your orchid, what is it doing and the size of your roots. So in my opinion, if you're doing a wet-dry cycle, for example, for a seedling, that should not be dry even beyond a day if it's got fine roots. If a seedling has chunky roots, you can leave that seedling to dry out for another day or two maximum. If you're in very, very dry climate and if it's hot, don't ever let it dry out, because that seedling needs to have the humidity to boost as well. So there is a big difference between a mature orchid as opposed to the smaller ones, and that would include miniatures. Some miniatures need a wet-dry cycle simply because the culture requires it. They need a dry winter rest, as I mentioned yesterday. We have, for example, Laelia furfuracea that is in my climate in a semi-hydro setup, and it needs a hard, dry, cold winter. So I am really pushing the bar here with trying not to keep my media wet, because that's not going to do the orchid any favors. If you have a large established orchid in a full growth mode during the summer, that media should never really dry out long term either. I would say that you can get away with it for a day before. You won't see stress symptoms after a day or two of it being dry, but you're already starting the process. So during the active growth, during the warm months of the year, a wet-dry cycle for an established orchid, 1 day, 2 days maximum. And during the winter, during the cooler months, if the light isn't extended to 12, 14 hours a day, then I would say you can take it easy to 5 days if your orchid isn't in active growth and everything else is looking fine. If it's in active growth during the winter, don't let it dry out either for too long, provided that you give it the environment where it can continue developing the new growth adequately, if that makes sense. Now, when it comes to wet-dry cycle, when it comes to sphagnum moss, I would say that the surface should be crunchy, but that doesn't mean that the inside of the pot is dry. All right? Because some orchids do like a wet-dry cycle and they're growing in sphagnum moss, but it doesn't mean that the media should grow dry all the way. Then if the surface of the sphagnum moss is already crunchy, that means the center of the pot is on the verge of drying out, barely damp, so to speak, and it's time for watering. You're very welcome. Thank you for the question. All right, so we don't want to lose our loot. Oh, this is a good one. Listen, we don't, whoa. All right, apologies about that. That's when we just have a wall committee here. It's just done its job. Sorry about that. Anyway, I hope that you saw that in the chat. I was trying to type away so that you don't get dead air for nothing here. I do apologize. It happened rather quickly, and I don't want the barking to come through if you're wearing earbuds or anything. It's not really that unpleasant, but you know, it's a surprise factor. It's not that nice. Anyway, yeah, I was actually saying we don't want to lose our roots, but in actual fact, it is we don't want to lose our roots, because that will cause an orchid to die. Especially monopodials are extremely difficult to bring back when their roots have gone. Next up, I've got too much light or heat. So I've kind of combined the two there. I think that we'll be okay with that. Why are you in this one? You should be up there. Let's go. There we go. Now, with too much light or heat, I'm sort of referring to supplemental lighting, also, for the outdoor growers, the scorching of the leaves. It kind of, depending on how much of the surface area of the leaf is affected, it really does interfere with photosynthesis. Too much light also stresses orchids. Even though we say they need a lot of light, it's all relative. So just like us, they need their downtime, especially those that open their stomata at night, because that is when they breathe. Without darkness, orchids will struggle with the constant metabolism and photosynthesis and wear themselves out. When we speak of too much light, we can probably say that if we were to forget to switch our artificial lights off for 3 months, I know it's a long time, but to give you an idea, then issues will start for the likes of Cattleyas, Phalaenopsis, or any genus that has a thick cuticle around their structures. Those are the orchids that have their stomata closed during the day to conserve energy during what could be high airflow, which would lead to dehydration via the leaves. That is a mysticity. Yes, Dania. So while orchids with thin leaves, like those in the Oncidium alliance or Maxillarias, terrestrial orchids as examples, these open their stomata during the day. They need their rest period in the dark from all the transpiration they have been doing during the day. In addition to that, when we consider direct sun on the structures of the orchids, sunburn and the like will destroy cells, cook them, as a matter of fact, in turn destroying the surface of the structures, which are like the solar panel for the orchid to photosynthesize with. If this happens to many parts of the orchid, then there is less surface area for the orchid to photosynthesize, especially, let me get there, thus weakening the orchid until it has a chance to grow a new growth, if that is even possible. And seedlings need to have high light to thrive and get growing, but burn the leaves of a seedling and, well, there is very little hope of recovery. Once again, same thing with monopodial orchids. Seeing their storage structures are the leaves. If enough of them burn, then the surface area is compromised, not just by photosynthesis being diminished, but the leaf serving as a storage organ cannot do its job in the event of an emergency. So anybody under artificial lights, watch your timers. Adjust according to seasons as well, because some species live in environments where they get less light during some seasons of the year and longer exposure to light in other seasons of the year. So if you do not have timers, set alarms on your phone so that you do not forget to switch them off. Now, as I mentioned in this part previously, I'm talking again slow metabolism, and if you expose your orchids to light 24/7 for 3 months, that's when stress will start to kick in, and things are not going to be looking very, very good for no matter which orchid. Doesn't matter what time of day, night they open their stomata. The triggering fact for not getting your stomata to open or to close is, let's say, hyperventilation as opposed to suffocation. And for the Cattleyas, for example, the thick cuticle orchids, they definitely need to get their stomatas open at night. I hope that I can show you a picture. I may double up on some because I didn't mark these out. My files are in such an order. If I start to mess them up, then my dyslexic brain starts to have issues the next day. So let me just share this with you. Obviously, this is clearly a very horrible thing to see, and I was gutted when I saw this. Now, this is a Cattleya dowiana that had one day last year of 39 degrees Celsius converted to 102 degrees Fahrenheit, and it was a bit of a breezy day, not much, but you can see the damage of maybe 3 hours of sun exposure on this leaf, while she's got plenty of other structures that are still looking okay. That leaf, that is a picture from last year, is obviously yellowing now at the tip of it. And that's quite a radical burn on a very important structure that, yeah, it's lost. Do that on a seedling and there's nothing left. So let me just see if I have another image here. Sorry for flicking there. I guess I can't do that without compromising my presentation here. But I do have another image that I wanted to show you, because I want to show you the stomata, and I may double up on it because it's so evident when we get to the next subject of temperature. I'll show you what's going on with that leaf, but I also want to show you stomata, how obvious they are based on the circumstances. And this is not due to high light, but it is a super obvious image. I've never seen stomata so clear without having actually happy sap dripping from it. Now let me see if I can, do you see that? So when I was talking about stomata, I don't know about everybody and how they are able to identify stomata, how clearly can they see it. This orchid is fine-ish. She's not having any kind of fungal issues or anything, but you can see that there are certain symptoms, and we'll get back to this image later on, but you can see how predominant the stomata can be shown because, of course, the cell structure is compromised. All right. So if that doesn't shut down or open up, the orchid can't breathe, and bit by bit it will start to suffocate, and we don't want to do that. Now, let me just check my notes before I get carried away and get ahead of myself, because I don't want to mix and match topics, because I can do that very, very quickly. So we've done that and we've done that. Right. We can go back to our beautiful Mysticidi and close this window, and we'll get back to that image in a moment. And I keep checking for questions. I've got chameleon eyes tonight. And here's the link again if anybody wants to jump up and join us. So number 3, the opposite effect is also true. Lack of light. Clearly, no photosynthesis, weak structures, easy access for pests. Having addressed the issues and dangers that too much light can cause for our orchids, the opposite also applies if we give them too little light. While our leaves may get nice green and lush and look beautiful, the lack of sufficient light will cause an orchid to not develop strong structures. The protective cuticles will weaken, and that is invitation for pests to sink their extremities into the soft cell structures, which will bring all kinds of issues along with it as well. I'm not even talking about blooming. I'm talking about everything that can cause an orchid to die. All right. This is not about how much light does my orchid need to bloom. If we were talking about that, it wouldn't be in this category. The lack of light can cause an orchid to die. And the first thing is, if the structures get weakened, then there's more access to pests. The entire protective cuticle is weak as well. Now, while an orchid will be able to handle low light conditions, all you need to do is watch my channel and see what is going on during these winter months. It can only do so for a maximum of 3 months again. I, as a safety catch, use 3 months. An orchid may go longer with adverse light conditions. However, I like to use the safety catch of 3 months because that is my experience. That is what I can speak on. I cannot speak for anything longer and beyond that, okay? So, and also their hormonal issues have a 3-month rhythm. Usually 6 to 8 months, hormones start to activate. And if by that time they don't get the conditions that they need based on what the orchid is doing within its biorhythm, 4 weeks later, their issues will start to compound themselves before we even see it. So hopefully, during adverse conditions like this, the orchid doesn't start to go into active growth, because then we can get away with it. The orchid is protected, it is resting, it is doing whatever. No real light conditions, be they bright or be they less light, is going to affect the health of the orchid. Some resting orchids need high light. I know, but we're talking about things that could be an issue. We're not talking about what triggers blooming, okay? So during dormancy, an orchid is also okay to have lower light levels, even if high light is required. Your blooming might be compromised, but know that your orchid is going to still pull through and it's going to live. And it is the best time to have any issues, any problems, if an orchid is dormant or not in active growth, okay? So, of course, it is best to have the best light exposure for orchids, but know that if circumstances do not permit this, the orchids may still grow, but the structures will be smaller as a result of not enough light and may not bloom. But Pedakin is lurking. I am so happy that you're here. Welcome. Lurk away. Good to see you. I'm glad you peeked your head out from whatever bushes you were hiding behind. Thank you. Pedakin is coming from Twitch. Thank you, sir. Right, so where was I? So while the orchid won't thrive, it will survive for the duration. So in case of emergencies, it's not a total loss. Accept the downside of this, but take it in stride and know that it's only a matter of time. Circumstances will improve, but the orchid will have gained another storage structure, and that storage structure will grow roots, even if not as many and as, let's say, vigorously as if everything was perfect. Okay, so sometimes it is best to cut our losses as long as the orchid lives. Okay, the only thing is, at this point, for the lack of light with less to little photosynthesis, as far as that is concerned, that's not the danger, but the weakening of the cuticle is the danger. And what will take an orchid down under these circumstances are pests. So that's what we're going to move on to next, because pests are the one big factor. No matter whether your conditions are awesome or your conditions are adverse, you've got high humidity, low humidity, everything is perfect. You get yourself some pests into your orchid and you can't see it. Oh boy, trouble in paradise for sure. So whatever damage they do in conjunction with adverse conditions, they will induce rot. The two kind of go hand in hand. Let me see if I can quickly, without wasting your time, got to keep it moving. So I've been told, and I don't want to do the dead air thing too much. So my little classic example is my twinkle. Bless this mess. All right, so we have a few things going on here, but it all started with pests. The fact that I had a scale infestation that I couldn't identify fast enough in amongst the tight structures here caused rot. I was only aware of the scale once I saw funny things happening. My pseudobulbs were going old, and I thought, yeah, they're just the old structures, no biggie. And then I looked along the spikes and I thought, whoa, it wasn't just a little bit of scale here or there. There was bumps all along the spikes. It was all of a sudden, you just get the hibby-jibbies and yuck. And if I didn't have a channel, I would have just snap, taken it off and, whatever I would have done. But no, I had to wait for the right moment to film while I was grossing out. Michelle Fucarino says, happy sap and stomata were mentioned. I think I smeared the happy sap for a taste on the underside of a couple of leaves of my Dan amethyst. Yes, they turned a greenish gray. Should I clean them? They turned a greenish gray. The leaves turned a greenish gray because of the happy sap. If you've got airflow, you've got humidity, your orchid is clearly doing very, very well. If you're concerned about the color, then no harm, no foul to wipe them, but you don't use any kind of product with those dendrobiums at all. Just use some clear water on a rag and wipe the underside of the leaves at dusk. Do not wipe them during the day. You don't want to be clogging the stomata, and dendrobiums will open their stomata during the day, and towards evening they shut down. So that's when I would wipe the leaves. Dania Totelli says, I spray with a DIY solution and then I hung up the plant upside down for 2 days to avoid rot. I did that with my zygo in the early days. Yes, yes. Clogged stomata. It could be clogged stomata. I don't know. Let me just see. You said they turned greenish gray. How many leaves did you taste? All of them? Greenish gray. So yeah, wipe them in the evening. If you've got your airflow, that's fine. And then check them in a couple of days. I had a Phalaenopsis that was doing a happy sap production, too many. Okay. Sometimes if the temperature's got a little bit too cold, happy sap being a liquid can also cool things down even further, and then we're going to get to airflow. Airflow is a cooling effect that'll cool things down even further, so maybe the leaves got a little bit too cold with the 3 components causing that. It is a possibility. I had a happy sap machine as a fowl, and I could wipe every 3 days until she finally regulated herself. So yeah, dendrobiums, only water on the rag, not dripping wet rag, just, lightly damp and wipe it off. And no product at all. So we were at the pest. Oh yes, so you see, if I hadn't seen those grotesque scale, my twinkle wouldn't even have been a project. My twinkle would have been history. But the rot wouldn't have happened without the scale, so we have to be super, super mindful of pests. Anyway, having said that, basically, all the points that can individually cause an orchid to die when it comes to pests apply. I know I said we were going to go and try and attack 14 points today. If we get to 7, Hakuna Matata, but all those points can involve pests, which will then bring the orchid down. So 4 is my favorite number. And I put pests on number 4 for a reason, because it's importante that no matter what else we're doing correctly, if one of the 14 goes wrong, pests are the first thing to attack, because pests will go for weak orchids because they have a very thin cuticle and weak cells. I mentioned last night that the twinkles in themselves are very finely constructed. They don't have thick cuticles. There's not much protection. And hello, today we've got twinkle as an example because of pests. Anyway, so there's a lot that needs to be in place to stop the rot and the population and the damage caused by pests. All dangers we're discussing today are pest magnets, but we have a major inexpensive weapon against pests, and I think that we don't use it often enough, at least I point to myself, and that is vigilance. If conditions are adverse, that's your first sign to be super vigilant. Besides, there's not much that we need to do with our orchids, and we want to play with them and mess with them, and then we say, well, I don't have to water, I don't this, I don't that. So we have much more time to be checking our orchids for pests while we don't have to give them all the other time-consuming care. Using the extra time to inspect our orchids, the underside of the leaves, the structures, the bases of the rhizomes, wherever, the whole 9 yards. If need be, get a magnifying glass out. Or in my case, sometimes my hand shakes a little bit. I can't hold my hand steady. I lose a little bit of control. I actually take up close-up videos, so that I can inspect my orchids on a big screen. I kid you not. That's not because I'm a helicopter mom. It's just, it makes it easy for me to identify pests. But during the downtime with orchid care, I highly recommend that you say, without having much to do, take time and look at your orchids. Now, I am fortunate that on my sunny days, I'm handling 80-90% of my collections, and boy, do I have a look. So my issue is during the warmer months of the year where I'm doing all the other orchid care, I'm so distracted and I think, yeah, it's fine. And boom, that's when my problems start, okay? So take the free biggest weapon that we have at our disposition, and that is vigilance, and make it work for you. Now, if you have a big collection, of course, it shouldn't be able to consume your entire day, but make a rotor, put a schedule in your phone or something that says shelf by shelf, so that one shelf gets a complete look-see, and then, at least that way you get through the rotor. Maybe a shelf gets looked at once a week, all right? So my thing right now has been with the phalaenopsis. I learned those in 2021 when it came to scale. Since then, we've been doing very, very well with the phalaenopsis. In 2022, I learned about scale and tolumnias. I dropped the ball there. Now we're back on track on that, even though I may lose some. But I've also put a 2-month alarm into my phone to alert me that it is time. Yes, that is a good one as well, Robbie. A jeweler's thingy. I know exactly what you mean. That's fantastic. So I now have alert set to my phone for the coming season, and I hope that when my alarm goes off that I am actually able to attend to those things. Right now, I've got my paintbrush out and I've got my garlic alcohol, and I do paint even sus looking things, because if I'm not sure, at least I've got peace of mind. I've addressed it. I've even touched up on several spots several times, because I'm not entirely sure. Are you still alive or are you dead? Are you even something I should be concerned about? Anyway, it does no harm going in and doing it repetitively. If it is something as simple as using garlic, and if you alcohol, and if you don't use garlic, it's not a big deal. I just happen to do so. Okay, so we can always keep pest in mind as we move forward with anything and everything that I'm talking about, because whatever brings our orchid down, by the time it's dead, it's had a period of weakness. And if we're trying to combat one thing, the weakness will then also attract pests. Suddenly we've got two things to deal with. And once the pests get a hold of a weak orchid, I'm sorry. Let's just keep it at that, because I speak from experienza. Okay, I think I've got my groove on here. Touch wood. Come on, don't get too confident, because my go-to word about orchids, there's one word that is fabulous, and if you can keep that in mind for your orchids when it comes to taking care of them, that is vigilance. The one word that is a negative, the only word that you need to know, to remind yourself, that covers the whole spectrum of what could go wrong in the orchid hobby. You don't need any more explanation. The negative word that you need to keep in mind is complacency. So vigilance versus complacency. These two words will help you in your orchid journey, I promise you, because complacency is the enemy of any hobby grower. Vigilance is your friend. Dania Tortelli also says, I also use little rectangular piece of blue cardboard and I spread glue for rats. It's okay. You never killed useful insects. All right. I think that you are a superstar. Honestly, please let me know in the chat what is a useful insect when it comes to orchids apart from the pollinators. And I'm not saying that to be facetious. I'm just asking out of interest, so that because right now my mind draws a complete blank when I'm thinking of the topic of a threat towards our orchids. And then let me know. Let me know, Danya. Just keep listing useful insects for orchids. Springtails, yeah, they're not harmful. They're not harmful at all. They are useful for organic media to some degree. They feed on the decayed. And it seems blue color likes to thrips. It seems ladybug lacewings. They are useful, Robbie. Ladybug lacewings are useful to orchids. They're okay. All right. It seems blue color likes to thrips. Maybe I can turn that around if I'm understanding correctly. Springtails and other small insects in media. Yes. That is correct. They're in media that is breaking down. They do a great job to enjoy some of that. The ladybug. Ladybug is useful to orchids because it eats, yes, because it's a predator for aphids. Some kind of mites even. That is correct. Yes. All right. Here we go. We've got yin and yang. We've got the balance coming in. That's awesome. You see, if I cannot release predator bugs around here for my aphids, or they just fly away. And I can't release, let's say, a ladybug population here because ladybugs don't stay if you just release them. If they haven't hatched in the area, they'll just fly away as well. So, but yes, I've heard that. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that input. Anybody watching on the replay, please consider adding your experience in the comments, which kind of insects are actually beneficial to orchids. That's right. Now I remember, ladybugs against aphids. Predator mites feed on the bad ones. That is correct. Unfortunately, I can't release predator mites here. They won't stay. I am the predator mite. The orchid mite Hulk. Anyway. Right. You guys keep typing away. I'll keep looking into it and seeing if there are any questions. And just because I'm trying to stay on track with my plan here tonight, just in case somebody wants to hop up and let's have a chat and continue the conversation. Right. Blah-de, blah-de, blah. Okay, sorry. That was not a good filler word, but having a drink of water is. Just one moment. We're on to point number 5 in 48 minutes. We're not doing too shabby. Okay, point number 5. Leaving foliage wet overnight is a fungus magnet and bacterial access point. So there we have the topic of before. Happy sap is wet as well. And to leave that wet overnight, not necessarily a problem if you're growing indoors with a nice controlled climate where everything's nice and toasty. Frogs? Frogs. It's not an insect, but beneficial, definitely. Oh, and I love the sound of frogs. Oh, I miss them so much. Oh, I can go off on a tangent about frogs in Africa. Dang, do they have loud voices, but so much fun. Better than an air conditioner. Anyway, so we don't want to have our structures, I put leaving foliage wet, but any structures wet during adverse conditions overnight, unless, of course, let's say your orchids are protected in a grow environment like a greenhouse or a grow space indoors that has consistent night temperatures, nice airflow, etc., etc. But we're talking about things that are not so positive. So if temperatures are too low at night, maybe we can get away with any fungus developing overnight, but the water, maybe, let me rephrase that, maybe we will not get a fungus jumping onto our leaves straight away. But here's the issue. I see you, Sheila. The water may drop to a low temperature, and now think happy sap, what I mentioned earlier on, and that can cause cell damage, which will appear as yellow random spots on one leaf, but not on another. So even if indoor growing has adequate airflow, remember that airflow is not only there to cool orchids down during warm temperatures, but airflow in low temperatures is cold. Our weather forecast tells us, as an example, we can have XYZ temperatures during the day and night. But we also get an additional temperature, which is defined as feels like, right? And during the cooler nights, while the fans are going, what our ambient temperature reading is may feel cooler on the leaves of the orchids. So keep that in mind. Airflow at night is not a guarantee that a damp orchid will dry out. I hope that makes sense. Yes. And my title here for my notes was Fungus Magnets and Bacterial Access Points, because some stomata, as mentioned, are open. Add to that a little bit of juicy, yummy sweet, happy sap, and it all kicks off if we're not vigilant about it. The thing is that most of the time we think that, well, I'm growing indoors, and we forget that actually airflow does change the temperature in the line of fire of the airflow, as opposed to what our temperature reading is on our thermometer. All right, so we have temperature ambient, but then there's a feels like temperature even for us humans. I hope that makes sense if you're thinking about your weather forecast. Josh, Riebsommer, it's good to see you. I have a jumping spider. I don't know what he eats, fungus, nuts maybe, but he's cute. Yes, aren't they sweet? I do have a jumping spider here as well. Several, as a matter of fact. They're already starting to make their home in the angrecoids. So cute. Sheila Broad says, best time to water. The best time to water, I would say, is early in the morning, early, like let's say before lunchtime, depending on your time, your climate, your temperature. It is definitely not a good idea to water in the afternoon, late afternoon. If, for example, your temperatures are going to be low at night, then it's best to wait until the next morning when you can water. All right, it doesn't mean that your media is going to dry out, but the structures will. If there's a little bit of a splash here or there, it's not about the media having to be dry by nighttime. It's about making sure that the structures during cooler temperatures do get dry and dry out before nightfall. And that will happen if you water in the morning before lunch. So yes, bacterial access points, everything that is open, everything that is new and tender, everything again where a pest can take a bite out, all that fun stuff. So keep your happy sap in check and see that the leaves don't cool down too much, because airflow doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be nice and warm. Especially for me, when I go outside on a wind still day, it's going to be nice in the sun. I go out on the same day and with the same temperature, clear blue sky, it's sunny, and there's a wind going, I am freezing my cojones off. I tell you, it is so cold. Even though, let's just say, the same temperatures apply, but my feels like temperature is much lower. I hope that makes sense. Okay, that's the same with our fans. While they serve a purpose in the summer, they can be dangerous in the winter. So don't rely on them too much. Either switch them off at night, or make sure that you increase the heat, at least if you've got wet structures, increase the heat for the night so the fans don't do the counteracting effect. All right. Speaking of fans, that's point number 7. Point number 6, first of all, before we go to fans, is excessive amount of fertilizer is a detriment to our orchids as well, and too much love is going to kill them. And especially because of the salts on the roots. Once again, if we lose our roots, wow, we have a hard job trying to revive our orchids. So applying an excessive amount of fertilizer or supplements may dehydrate the roots because of the salt buildup around the root system that sporadic flushing will not be able to eliminate, especially when it comes to media that is porous and absorbs fertilizer supplement remains that are not taken up by the orchid. And I'm speaking leca, ceramis, pumice, lava rock, and of course bark and sphagnum moss. Any media that is highly water retentive and absorbing, oh boy, be cautious with the fertilizer. Or if you're a happy fertilizer and your orchids need it, make sure that you back it up with a lot of flushing. The key word is here, sporadic flushing is not going to suffice over an extended period of time, all right? On top of that, if it doesn't take out the roots in the pot, it will result in black root tips or leaf tip dieback. Anita Brown says, thank you, my Lord, gotta stop watering just any time. Yeah, the morning sounds much better. It definitely gives you peace of mind. Yeah. So not only can there be a lot of damage happen in the pot when we go at it with too much fertilizer, it will take out the roots at the surface as well. It'll start putting on leaf tip dieback. We're going back to orchids that are like seedlings. You do not need to risk damaging any structures that are vital for photosynthesis. Sorry, stumbling words are hard tonight again. But for photosynthesis, all the little things add up when it comes to smaller orchids. The moment that you lose a leaf, again, let's say twinkle, yeah, it's so difficult then to get them to recover, okay? Now, let me just check my notes. Okay, now if only root tips or some roots die back and some leaf tip dieback occurs, then we have a chance to easily correct the problem. We can stop fertilizing for a month to 6 weeks. I know that sounds a lot for people that fertilize a lot, and increase the flushing intervals to clean out the media. You can also soak the pot. This is what a lot of people do, but hear me out. You can also soak the pot to release excess salts, but remember that as you lift the pot out of the vessel you use for soaking, the minerals that dislodge themselves at the surface, they will not drain through the media, but they will resettle at the surface of the media again. So while you have improved the situation in the pot, the surface will still have high salt levels. I hope I'm making sense. I hope I'm keeping this straight on track. So even after a soak, if that is your preferred method of flushing, you also have to follow up with a good flush through the pot generously by letting water pour through its entirety, just to get whatever would settle on the surface out of the pot as well. Now, I'm a fan of changing out the media. That is an option dependent on what the orchid is doing. If it is not in active growth, then if the orchid is not in active growth, there is no point in repotting an orchid where the roots are compromised if it's not in active growth. Changing out the media is an option, but it's not going to change any dead roots from miraculously coming alive again. So while we've got the stress of an orchid that is about to lose or has already lost its root system because we over-fertilized, didn't flush enough, changing out the media is going to compound the stress and add more to it. I prefer to advise on the fact, leave the orchid as is, wait for the right timing, and if you need to, then just take out whatever the surface media is that is probably still a bit salty and replace it with fresh, and then hope for the best. Because while we might think that all the roots are dead, if we're looking through a clear container, for example, and it all looks, oh my goodness, I messed this up so bad, you want to repot, you're not going to get roots back. All right, even if you put old roots in the pot for anchoring, they're gone. You're gonna have to wait for new roots. You might as well just leave the orchid in the pot and wait for new roots, but change the media for peace of mind. If you see new roots coming, they don't get burnt on the older media straight away, okay? Now, I know that sounds probably radical because most people will pull their orchid out of the pot, and I did pull an orchid out of the pot today, and I'm not sure she's going to make it, but leaving her in the pot wouldn't have helped either. But you need to be very, very clear. If you can provide a sufficient light, if the orchid is about to come into active growth because you know her well enough, or if you're going to risk it anyway and you don't want to avoid any rot, then you're going to put that orchid into ICU and then hope for the best. Sandy's Orchids in the house. You are never late. This is like a city bus, remember? You hop on, you hop off. As long as the ride is still ongoing, there's never a too late. It's good to see you, though. Thank you for coming in. Right, so afterwards, even though the roots may be dead, flushing should still be a part of the regime, simply because, keyword, may be dead. We never really know if all the roots in the pot are dead based on what we're seeing, because there may be a few that may be damaged but are still functioning, and in the event that the latter is still the case, cleaning the media of the excess salts is the best way you can support the roots that are in the pot, somewhat tiding the orchid over until the repot timing is perfect. I hope I wasn't talking in circles there. Let me know in the comments and I will try to qualify what I just said. Anita just turned her fan off. Watered too late and dreary day and cold indoor orchid. Ooh, watered too late and dreary day and cold. Indoor orchids. Yeah, but at least you've got nice indoor warm temperatures, right? So I think that's going to be okay. That'll be okay. Turn your fan back on in the morning. It'll be fine. Hakuna Matata. I don't want to panic anybody, okay? But I think that many times when we see things on the internet and I'm reading through articles, I'm like going, yes, but why? So a lot of people say what I'm saying, and that's why I said maybe this is a live and some people are already yawning and they know everything I'm talking about, but maybe you've never heard the why. Why shouldn't I leave my, orchids with some water on the foliage? Why? What happens if I do? What happens? It's always like, okay, it's always like don't, and do, da, da, da. And I'm not going to sing, promise. But you know what I mean? But to understand, I mean, we can go through the whole list of don't do this and don't do that, and we can be done in 30 minutes. I'm the kind of person, I need to understand why, because even if the information doesn't sink in straight away, eventually something in the back of our mind triggers something and it goes, oh, wait, hang on a second. Oh, dang, no. Now we've seen something within our own collection that we've heard somewhere before, and we can assimilate the information, bring it together and apply it to our space. I find it important to give a why, whether I do something, why I do it. When I do it, I have to also give you a why I do it when I do it. Okay? That is from the angle from how I operate. And that is why sometimes my videos get a little bit chatty and lengthy, and it just sounds like this woman is just rattling off the obvious, but there are nuggets in there that can be of help the moment you can maybe see the similarities in your collection. That is at least what I'm trying and I'm aiming for. So, deep breath. Sheila, I see you. I'm going to have a sip of maji. That is Swahili for water. Maji baridi. That is Swahili for cold water. You have 2 fans. That's not a problem. Switch one off. You're welcome, Michelle. Yay! Thank you for the feedback. Thank you so much. Sheila, while that orchid is in ICU, I've been told not to give it too much light because it doesn't have energy for photosynthesis. Does your orchid have leaves? If your orchid has leaves, it has energy to photosynthesize. If your orchid doesn't have roots, you need the orchid to be able to photosynthesize. Now, too much light is also relative. You don't want it in direct sun because you don't want to heat the leaves. You don't want to scorch anything. Those are your solar panels. Those are going to create the energy for your orchid to then produce roots. But to have them in like shade, like let's just say slipper orchid shade, or what we call, you can leave them in complex phalaenopsis kind of light. That is not good light for an ICU orchid. It has to be, let's say, Cattleya light, but out of direct sun, if that makes sense. All right, the solar panels cannot function without sun. And I'm not saying, again, please, I'm not saying put direct sun on. I'm saying light. It does need light. If you're using artificial lights, then keep it on the lower end. Like, if I don't know how much the distance is between your lights and your shelf. But if you have, let's say, like, for example, if you have a top shelf and you have pots covering that, and then underneath there are some shadows and some shady areas, that is where you put your ICU, so that they're kind of getting residual lights filtered through the leaves and the pots coming in from above. I hope I'm making sense. I'll get my whiteboard out and I'll start drawing it for you. I really want to, not just brush over things and like move on like some kind of a speed train here. Warm indoors. Anita, you're a step ahead of the game. That's perfect. Good stuff. Thank you, Sheila. I appreciate that. Oh, and I love your icon so, so much. That is a sweet memory, maybe? Phalaenopsis sweet memory. Anita Brown says, I like the why. Thank you. No, thank you. Everyone has been so helpful, learned something new, or awesome. Awesome, awesome. My job here is done. Gorgeous. What an amazing image that is. Oh, my chat looks so colorful. I love it. All right, so we've done the roots thing because of the excessive amount of fertilizer. And you know what? If you feel that you've killed your roots, like I showed you right at the beginning with my oncostele, you know, orchids are extremely forgiving, thankfully. Monopodules, not so much. It's a learning curve, all right? Let me just say, the moment you see white things starting to develop on the surface of your pots, no matter what media you use, back off on the fertilizer before it's too late. Don't think while the orchid is in active growth, she needs that and eventually she'll pick it up. No, 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 no. Back off. It should never come to orchid to root rot because of excessive fertilizer, unless you've been on vacation for 6 weeks and somebody else has been trying to do you a favor and wanted you to come back to enormous orchids and thought, nah, I'm going to give them a tad more. All right. The moment you see anything white on the surface, take it off, replace it with fresh, and flush the dickens out of the pot. All right. But losing a root system for some podials, it's kind of okay depending on what you've got to work with as far as storage structures. Monopodial orchids, not so much. And I think that if I've got somebody here that's oh, I wish Danielle's Orchid Ranch would be around. She is the guru of saving monopodials. Oh, that lady. Anyway, moving on to lucky number 7. Okay, everybody that has sort of listened to me now talking about fans, remember I was talking about fans at night, okay? When I don't have my fans on in winter, it's way too humid. Yes, that is true too. I think I need I was about to say stop the live straight away. Anybody know Michael's number? Now Michael's area, we need to help him. And then I'm reading the rest of the comment and I'm like going, oh my goodness, yes. I just found the area rug I want for the foyer. Maybe you should ask your dogs if they would float over it. Maybe. Or you could ask if they have it on sale. Ugh. Oh dear, Michael, I don't know how to help you with that one. Don't accept the cookies. Don't accept the cookies because you will get recommendations of that amount elsewhere. Don't accept cookies when it comes to those things. Oh, that's on sale. Oh, okay. Yeah, right. No, you didn't say anything wrong, Sandy. Nothing. No, not at all. You said absolutely the right thing. You don't have your fans on in the winter because it's way too humid. And yes, that is so true. Oh, Michael, just say you're Aladdin. Tell them something. Give them a spiel that they give it to you for even less than that. Something. You can promote it on Instagram. You're an influencer. Do something. I'm sure they'll come your way. Magic carpet. There you go, Linda. It's good to see you. Hi. Magic carpet. Yeah, does it fly? Does it make coffee? Oh, Michael, I feel you. Oh, I feel you. I'm so sorry, but I'm glad you found it. Yeah, I'm glad you found it, you know. Anyway, let's go on to lucky number 7. Hang on a second. I'm going to do this one more time, just in case. Just in case. You better do magic. It'll clean the house for you and everything. Oh, wow. Okay, lucky number 7 is lack of airflow. Transpiration, I put in my notes, it does not allow for maximum O2 uptake. Okay, right. Where was I going with this little bullet point? All right, in general, We know that orchids love air. We hear it all the time. That is what is being drummed into us over and over again in the beginner orchid care videos. Nothing against beginner care orchid videos, but I have to say, no matter how long you've grown an orchid or orchids as such, we are all beginners. It's just that some of us have sort of understood certain dynamics that make us sound like we know more or we know what we're doing, as opposed to others that are just starting to bring those pieces of the puzzle together, okay? But an orchid grower who considers themselves a pro, they get schooled very, very quickly. Lisette Carlson, Oklahoma, it's good to see you. I hope you're doing well and you're surviving everything that's going on. It's been pretty rough of a ride that you've had in your part of the world. That's fantastic. It's good to see you, Lisette. Very, very happy to see you. Right, so yeah, never mind, not going to be dissing on beginner orchid care videos, but let me tell you something. If I wake up tomorrow and I look at my orchids, I always feel like, all right, what can go wrong today? What did I miss? All right, so everybody's a beginner. Some people just have more pieces of the puzzle figured out, while others are only still starting to find the corners in the box, okay? Anyway, so airflow. Orchids love air. Let me get back to that. In actual fact, orchids love the oxygen in the air. I know, I sound like a record that has a jump or a scratch in it. Airflow, as mentioned previously, has its benefits when the temperatures are warm, so as to cool the leaves down, to keep them moving in case there are rays of sun, like for my Dawiana. Yeah, airflow keeps the leaves moving, you know, so that the rays of sun that may burn them if they stay stagnant in a pot in one single spot, you know, like a magnifying glass with which we can start a fire if we use the ray of sun concentrated on a flammable object. Not that I put my, you know, I didn't get my Dawiana to go up in flames, but when I touched the leaf, it was close enough, I tell you, close enough. Anyway, if growing in a controlled environment and not allowing for air exchange in the environment, then the air is stale. And here's the why. And the orchids are consuming the oxygen out of that supply of air in that environment, increasing the carbon dioxide concentration in the space. This will result in carbon dioxide toxicity in the orchids, and that will manifest itself in signs of deficiencies, even though we are fertilizing and supplementing our orchids on a regular schedule. Carbon dioxide toxicity doesn't just come through fertilizing or through the roots. If you've heard about that for houseplants, it can happen through air pollution as well. And it can reduce the amount of valuable nutrients our orchids metabolize, including iron, zinc, and particularly proteins that are vital to keep the nutrients moving through the structures. The reason being, we are going to be connecting some dots here now. The stomata of our orchids will close when there's too much carbon dioxide in the air. As mentioned previously, stomata open and close depending on the thickness of the cuticle, so it doesn't matter if they open during the day or night. With too much carbon dioxide, they will close and stop the process of transpiration. This, in turn, stalls nutrient uptake. All this weakens the orchids exposed to high levels of carbon dioxide, and behold, if I didn't have a lag, I would now say fill in the blank, because we talked about it before. Enter pests. Raincouver. Nice. So, you see, now, we are talking about extremes, okay? So nobody panic now who is in a very cold environment and that hasn't got the luxury of opening a terrace door wide for at least 10 minutes a day, okay? Please understand that not knowing about this, though, is, I find we need to understand that orchids breathe in, breathe out, and they can suffocate, all right? Air pollution is something that is in our environment. It's something that we live with. It's something we feel in our lungs. So if our orchids don't have fresh air, fresh oxygen to take in order to breathe, and all they breathe is stagnant air because they exude carbon dioxide. So I'm talking a lot, I know. And behind me, I've got my orchids that are open, have their stomata open, and here I am throwing carbon dioxide at them. No wonder they're struggling. I know, it's a stretch, but you know what I mean. Now, meanwhile, I can open my terrace door. It is fundamental, what I'm trying to get at, to keep clean air, even if you're in a controlled environment, but you cannot open a window. How to do that? And it is a tough one, and it would require a balance between cranking up the heat while you open the window, move the orchids away from the source of the cold, fresh air, or from another space, I see you, Danya, from another space further away from the orchids, allow for a measure of fresh air to access, and then use a fan to push that fresher air to do a form of circulation of refreshing the air in that space from another source further away, allowing it kind of to warm up as it goes through the room, if that makes sense. My aunt always used to open, yes, we know orchids don't like drafts, but hear me out. My aunt, not with orchids, but just in the winter for the house when everybody's hunkered down, especially during Christmas when the whole family is gathered in the living room, she would open the bathroom window. I used to hate her for that. Christmas in Germany, coming from Africa and going to the bathroom. Did it have to be the bathroom window? Anyway, moving on. Keep the bathroom door open and then crack open the living room door a little bit, and then she would push fresh air through by form of a slow draft. All right? That is what I mean. And we weren't freezing in the living room, but the air started to move ever so gently. We can increase that airflow with fresh air by moving the air from one area. It's fresh and it warms up by the time it reaches our orchids. Now, what I'm saying is super extreme, but trust me, as we move through the points, there is another factor that can come into play, which pollutes the air when we get to pollutants, and everything like a little pyramid can compound itself and cause issues. Right. Danya says, would more calcium help? No. No. If your orchid is, let's say, resting, stomata still open and closed, it's not growing, so you're putting calcium in the pot, that would probably be far too much and there's no need for it. Your orchid is not in active growth, more calcium is not going to help that either. If I am now answering the question directed at what I was talking about. So calcium doesn't help in situation when the conditions aren't right and the orchid isn't behaving. If you're asking about the root rot from before, the root loss because of fertilizing, that's not going to help either, because if we've lost roots or we have, let's say, old roots that are just tiding over, their nutrient uptake isn't sufficient either. Seaweed might. Seaweed might. Growth hormones might. As long as other balances are in effect, light has to be adequate and long enough, and temperature. And then that might recover it. Okay? Michael McCarthy, oxygen is only used in nocturnal respiration, releasing carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is used in daytime respiration, photosynthesis, releasing oxygen. Thank you very much. For somebody like me, eso es muy importante. I appreciate that comment. Thank you. So, all the carbon dioxide I'm exuding right now, I'm also releasing that with my cattleyas. Okay, but still, it's too much. I'm releasing it. The cattleyas are releasing it. Nothing, all the doors are closed. I got to open the doors tomorrow, COC. As far as I'm concerned, too much of this carbon dioxide will do your head in. Anyway, I hope that makes sense as to why it is important to have some fresh air. I'm not saying to get a blizzard through, let everything blow a hoolie, and you're running around, you know, mummified and dressed up so that your orchids get fresh air. No, I'm not saying that. But a little refreshed air is very important. All right. CO2 burners. Yep, I got that. I see ya. I see ya. Okay. We're moving on to number 8, lack of humidity, excess humidity. Leaves dry out through transpiration, roots will dry out and burn. Well, those are my bullet points. Where was I going with that? Or, wait, I missed one. Rot will happen on new growths with excess humidity. Can also happen with lack of humidity because, you know, everything starts to dehydrate and it doesn't necessarily rot, but it'll just collapse and fall apart. Oxygen is important for roots because it is needed for both energy production and some nutrient transport. Correctamundo. Muchas gracias. So good to have you here, Michael. You have no idea. All right. So rot can also happen if there is no humidity. Just keep that in mind because as a new growth grows, little tiny baby cuticles, little tiny cute tender cells that you just want to sink your teeth into. If you're like me, I like to pluck fresh grass and then nibble on it, you know. Shouldn't be doing that at this day and age because you don't know what's in it. I'm from Africa. I don't care. I do it anyway. But pests will love it, but also when it comes to, come on, Nina, get back on track here. Who cares if you chew grass? Where were you going with this thought? Tender cells, yes, they will dry out very quickly if there is no humidity. And even though it doesn't look like it, but you know, a little bit of rot will occur when cells collapse and get wet and oozy within themselves. And you think maybe, how did that happen? I might have watered too much. No, it's because there was no humidity in the air and pretty much they frazzled themselves out and lost too much water through the cells and couldn't handle it. Back it up with some humidity, that wouldn't have happened. Vice versa, too much humidity is going to cause rot because everything kind of settles in and around, you know, gravity pushes everything down and settles itself into the nice little crevices and juicy cells. Same thing, enter airflow. Lisette Carlson says, I have so much to learn. I like it better in Puerto Rico where they grow in the garden. Yes, I do too. I'm with you on that. You are new to orchids? Well, welcome. We are new to orchids as well. And as you can see, there's so much feedback in the chat, which is amazing because every little piece of the puzzle will create a bigger picture. And that's what we're aiming for here. That's awesome. I don't know how long you've been on my channel, Lisette, but I grew up in Kenya. And that is where they used to grow in the garden as well. Back then I was 12, I knew nothing. I loved them though. But yeah, Puerto Rico, oh my goodness, any kind of environment like that. We have somebody as well that comes in here quite often. She's over in the Caribbean and she tells me things and I'm like going, oh, I'm salivating. I go all the colors of the rainbows. I'm so envious. Meanwhile, here we are. All right, dry leaves. Leaves dry out through transpiration. That can also incur rot. I'm just making sure my bullet points keep me on track. So let me make sure, seeing as there's no wavering lump. This happens a lot while we have our orchids indoors. Excess humidity can be a problem because we think orchids need humidity. When we usually have them outside, we have an issue with the humidity, especially in my climate. And if the airflow is too strong, then, you know, sometimes even in an environment that has high humidity, it can go from 75 to 40 very, very quickly. That is something to take into consideration as well. Humidity is not always stable. However, the dangers of excess humidity for indoor growing is especially leaving the humidifier on overnight. Daniel Tortelli. Nina, I thought fan dried up a little bit. My problem is too much humidity in winter. If you have too much humidity in winter, I would need to know, are you using a humidifier to supplement your humidity? So that's where I was going to come next. Why we like a lot of humidity around our orchids when we're talking about avoiding the death of our orchids. In colder temperatures, automatically the humidity rises, and it might be just fine to switch a humidifier off on watering days anyway. And on top of that, alternate between one day having the humidifier on and one day it stays off. Now, if you say, well, on the day that my humidifier is off, I've got the heater on and the indoor space is too dry because of the heater, then I would suggest switch the humidifier off late in the afternoon. That will also be effective. Too much humidity, there is no such thing unless your temperatures drop to a level where everything feels a little bit damp. Okay? Now, in the winter, I would say, for me, no, not winter, let's just say, in adverse conditions as we're speaking now, when temperatures drop, no matter, winter doesn't really apply if you're growing indoors and you're keeping your room temperature to a human acceptable level, okay? It shouldn't be an issue. But when it hits evening time and you've got humidity of 70% and you're going to keep your fans on, and then your temperature drops because you're going to cut the furnace because you're going to bed, etc., that is not good. 70% by nightfall is not a good idea if temperatures are going to go down. You want to keep an average of humidity at 50%, no matter what the temperatures are, even if you've got airflow or no airflow. Then if you can keep it around 50% during the winter, your night temperatures, you're going to be fine. I hope that makes sense. I'm just going to take a drink of water because I know that this is sometimes when, people go and look at their numbers and they think, oh, I'm doing it wrong, my orchids are going to die. No, they're not. No, they're not. They're not going to die. These points are why they die, why they could die, and also how we can avoid it, okay? I don't know if everybody was here at the beginning, but it was not just the reasons why they die, it's how to avoid and prevent it from happening. In summer, by all means, get that humidity cranking and have a field trip. Loving it. Everything is easier when the temperatures are warm. I have 80 to 85, not always, thank God. Oh, okay. All right. That's good. I don't drop in this apartment, usually 21. Oh, then that's fine. If you don't drop below 20, well, you've got 21, I say 20 Celsius at night, then that's absolutely fine. Your humidity can stay as it is. Your temperatures call the shots. So I don't like to bang on about my situation, but I'm going to give you an opposing example, all right, to maybe understand where I'm coming from with regards to what can take an orchid down and how to avoid it, all right? So right now, indoors, all right, help me out here. Converter. Anyway, right now I've got 14 degrees Celsius indoors in the space where I'm sat, where my orchids are. I've got a humidity of 50%. That is top margin of humidity. I don't want any more than that because my temperatures are so low. I have no fan on at all. Okay. Now during the day, I can maybe get up to 18 degrees in the grow space, 20 degrees Celsius outside. And of course, I've got airflow outside, and I have 60% humidity outside with airflow and warm temperatures. I'm happy. So are my orchids. I don't care if you're growing, not growing, whatever. It's perfect, all right? That is the balance. I've got the warmer temperatures, I've got airflow and higher humidity. But indoors, I'm still a little bit cooler, but I've got airflow. You're usually 70% and you run a humidifier. as long as you don't see anything happening, let's say the surface of your media, everything is perfect and hunky-dory, you don't see mold coming on the surface of your media, you're fine. All right, the moment you, for example, you see mold developing, you might want to dial it down a bit. Unless you've got, deteriorating roots in the pot, which I doubt very much. But mold will usually give you an indicator that, yeah, if mold, the fluffy mold, the stuff that looks like sheep's wool, if that starts to come up, then you might want to dial it down with the humidity every once in a while. No issues, then go, happy days, perfect. You can see that your balance is pretty much what I just mentioned for my outdoors when I take my orchids outside. Got 20 degrees, 60% humidity, I've got airflow. Hey, if I had that at night, Hakuna Matata. All right, so that's the part about lack of humidity, okay? Do not forget, though, that lack of humidity can also cause new growths to collapse, rot out. It's kind of a difficult word because people associate rot with water, and I'm saying lack of humidity. But just remember, young tender cells have a problem with transpiration if there is no humidity around them, and they will dehydrate. Let's just say like that. They will dehydrate. So we can seg really well into wrong temperatures because we've been talking about a lot of temperatures. This is point number 9. It's either too hot or it's either too cold. All right. I don't think I need to elaborate on that too much because every orchid species or hybrid, whatever, has a preferred temperature, and some just don't survive in hot temperatures, no matter what you do. You can put them in the coldest media with evaporative cooling that you want. They won't make it because the ambient air doesn't match. It has to balance the same way out. Daniel Tortelli says, I've been so silly to add fresh moss this morning. Moss? Fresh moss, I'm assuming. No, you're not silly. Don't. You probably did exactly the right thing. We'll just have to dial down one of the humidity elements. Your orchids are going to love the moss. Maybe we can take away something else that creates high humidity, but your orchids are going to love the moss. No. Don't, there's no silliness. Absolutely not here. If anything, the moss is probably better than something else that might raise the ambient humidity. Sandy's Orchid says, I get 35 to 45% humidity in winter, usually the lower end, even with my humidifier going. Yeah, because you have some serious cold conditions that you need to counteract. Should I turn off my fans or maybe test it? 35, depends on your night temperatures. If your furnace goes off at night, yes, turn off your fans. If you keep your furnace at a cozy temperature like Robbie does, no need. All right? Don't let your temperatures go low. But if your furnace goes off when you go to bed, then turn it off. Turn the fans off, yes. And you can test it. You can play around with it. But yeah, I know that my grandparents always turned the heaters off when we went to bed. Robbie doesn't use heat. Goodness me. And you achieve 21 degrees Celsius? Dang. What's your secret? Huh. All right. I use hot chocolate. Doesn't work. My ambient air still stays cold. But anyway, so we want to be careful with too hot temperatures or too cold temperatures, okay? So they are very, very determined, like they determine a lot with regards to the demise of our orchids if we get the culture wrong. And we can, like I've made an error in judgment as well when it came to buying orchids, and I thought, it's going to be fine. No worries. I'm in southern Spain. Let's bring it on. And well, I was schooled. And I was very pleased that my judgment didn't fail me when I wasn't buying certain orchids because I knew it was going to get too cold. And I just had that feeling it's not going to work. And I was very happy, and I've never regretted that decision. So I don't grow masdevallias for that reason. Just know that you can be fertilizing correctly. You can have the right light. You can have everything dialed in with regards to humidity and airflow and blah, blah, blah. Everything's going well. Your orchid collapses. Well, it's probably a temperature issue, okay? It's probably that kind of an orchid genus or a parent in a hybrid does not like the temperatures it's exposed to. It can be absolutely nothing that you've done wrong, with the exception of your environment is not conducive to growing that orchid. Only in emergencies. Only when it was below 0 degrees Celsius, only in emergency. Okay, I got you. All right. Yeah, Robbie, I'm surprised. Your insulation must be epic. Andyland, I get it. Only in emergencies. Yeah, put that heat on. Dang. You guys are like me. We're pansies. SS, it's so good to see you. Welcome. It's so good to see you. I thought I saw your name pop up on the list somewhere, and I was like, I have not seen that comment, that account comment anywhere. So here you are. Welcome. It's good to see you. Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate that. Right. So also learn the lesson. You know, I bit off too much that I could chew in my environment. Shame on me. I thought I could do better. I thought I could accommodate. Turns out I couldn't. And that, at least that way we learn, and we get to grow vicariously if we find somebody else that grows them, and then we can Google eye and ooh and ah over them over there doing well. So next thing is, I know we're always happy. This is point number 10. How are we doing? 1 hour, 40 minutes. Is everybody still with me? I mean, we're at point number 10. Everybody okay? Do we want to continue? Shall we stop right here and continue this on Thursday? Nobody needs to feel as though, you know, I'm not going to be rushing through and be answering every question that comes through. But, you know, I think we're cooking with gas here. We're doing pretty well, considering that this is such a long-winded, varied topic. Anyway, right. Point. Thank you, Robbie. Okay, Robbie says yes. One. I only need one. Temporary go. That's fine. You're still okay. You're within the margin. You're within the margin, Sandy. That's okay. Your humidity is fine. I would say, just turn the fans off. Let the air stay nice and warm at 18 degrees around your orchids. It's going to be fine. Okay. I know that we want to see blooms. Who doesn't? But I can assure you that blooms will take an orchid out. Blooms are the last resort for an orchid to survive. That's their way of moving on and getting on with life and producing babies somewhere 5-6 years down the road. We enjoy the blooms for the colors, the fragrance, and the success of getting an orchid to bloom. But stress blooms will take an orchid down if we don't deal with it, and if we don't recognize the symptoms of, whoa, this is a stress spike. So I've been yapping away, and I hope that you've been enjoying the Pisticidi in the background. I did have some images prepared, but we have just been going and flowing, and I thought it was awesome. I completely forgot about my little pictures that I have. But let me just see if I can find one image that I've used in several videos, but I did pull this one out of the archives, dusted it off the shelves because I wanted to show as an example when we're going to talk about stress spikes, because not every spike is to be rejoiced. Like I said, orchids will produce spikes just to survive. And we think, Desiree is in the house. Josh Reeps Omar, still here. I bloom, happy days. Congratulations. That is awesome. Applause, applause. Everybody applause for Josh in the chat celebrating a first-time bloomer of a Masdevallia. I love Masdevallias. I think they're amazing. They're awesome. Anyway, so stress spikes. Yes, we want to see blooms. Let me take one little thing out of the corner and just leave me up there. And we have to make a decision. Thank you, Sandy. And you should. And you should. That's awesome. Send me a picture. I want to see it. Now I want to know. You give me intel like that. Now I want more. My email is, let me just type that in the window where I can see it. Here's my email, just to keep it simple, at Gmail. I can't see. I mean, I can see, but I'm blocking something. Something's blocking the square. Sorry. There we go. All right. Never, ever leave me hanging with information like that. All righty. So, yeah, we need to make a concerted effort and decision to recognize whether an orchid is blooming because it is happy and it should bloom out and it has the strength to bloom out, or that we need to cut the spike off. All right. Stress spikes are there for survival purposes, not necessarily because everything is great. Symptoms, and that's why I pulled up this picture. Symptoms of a stress spike, for example, this is a keiki that I put through a test of 12 months in Colomy. It was very difficult for me to do, but I followed the instructions and it was an epic fail. However, in the meantime, part of the decline was not just the fact that the orchid had signs of deficiencies on the leaves, the roots weren't growing properly, there was no development. I know, poor Walter Jr., we're going to get one bloom. Has recovered exponentially. But yeah, Walter Jr. was our test guinea pig here. And in the same year, I took another keiki off and put that into, leca and self-watering, and it happens to be a slower grower. Turns out that once Walter came out of this enclosed, horrible, caged situation, it has progressed and has caught up and overtaken the other keiki. However, back to this one, all right? So, signs of a stressed orchid is that it is going to bloom out of season, all right? Your structures are looking a little bit shriveled. Your leaves are looking a little bit yellowed. Your roots may not be looking exactly, how they should. Something's not quite right. There is no active, proper growth, new growth coming. I know this is a monopodial, but you can see how many spikes this little keiki with 2 leaves was trying to produce before it then started a 4th spike. And this is based on stress. This keiki was struggling, it was dying, and it had to, with the last breath of energy that it had left, it was pushing to grow a spike, COC, in order for it to bloom, to secure its survival. Now, I cut them all off. Obviously, Walter is doing fine and it's going to bloom for us with 1 bloom if I don't knock it off. So let me pull up another picture, or maybe a couple, just to give you an example. And they are kind of out of order, or maybe not. We'll see. We'll put order into this disorganization. And I am very sorry that I don't have these. Like I said at the beginning, if I take things out of order, my files in my archives are a huge mess and my mind just can't assimilate then the next day what I need to be doing, where it is. It all becomes jumbled. I'm telling you, living with dyslexic tendency is challenging on the best of days. And at the moment, I'm not having that many good days, brain-wise, let's just say. Okay, so here's Eonopsis popcorn haruri. Okay, boy, the poorly, some fungus thing. All right, okay. I don't think that... All right. I don't know if that comment was directed at me. Let me know, Robbie. Okay, so here's Eonopsis popcorn haruri. It's an older picture. It is from January 2022. Now, what you can see, hopefully, if I just do it like a square, let me just check if you can see that. I know it's not very bright. I wasn't expecting to do this, but you can see that I've kind of highlighted a shriveled out spike. I'm following it down with my mouse, okay? January, no, what did I say? February, right? February 2022, I had a nightmare. Yeah, I had a nightmare of a spring. Okay, February is not necessarily spring, but it'll all make sense because there's one more thing that I will address and then I'll remind you of this picture. This orchid was under stress throughout the winter, okay? And I was like, wow, look at this orchid go, rock and roll. I'm learning something new. Eonopsis popcorn haruri will bloom no matter what time of year, as long as the new growth has matured. Oh, boy, was I wrong. Boy, was I wrong. These are stress spikes. And the one that's sticking out nice and green up here, I did let that one bloom out just to see what it was going to do after I realized what was going on. Meanwhile, of course, I only realized these were stress spikes after they dried up. And then I saw the dynamic of this orchid and its decline. And I should have let this orchid, I should have cut the spikes very, very quickly. And I am a fan now. You will see me doing that a lot on my channel. I will let an orchid bloom, dedicate my blooms to my subscribers, my viewers, the commentators. I will cut the spike off, especially this time of year. Happily do that. I will even cut off spikes that have just got the buds on them simply for the sake of the orchid. And that is because of my current conditions. I don't recommend that you do that. But I want my orchids to rest and I need to bring them through alive to the next season so that they can gather strength for the next adverse conditions. But never ever rely on an orchid blooming consistently and happily and extending spikes and more buds and this, that, and the other and think the orchid is healthy. That is not always the case. I'll go back to my video, insolence. It's a disaster. 5 spikes. Okay, one of them is terminal. 5 spikes with buds to go, you name it. It's a disaster. I don't know if the orchid is going to make it. We're working on it. I have no idea. But blooms and spikes are not a guarantee for a good orchid. Letting an orchid bloom out that is stressed, and we'll get to the signals of a stress thing that I just showed you with a keiki, is going to cause the orchid to collapse. Now, unfortunately, when you saw my keiki previously, I showed you that it was growing a 4th spike. The energy is exponential when an orchid grows a spike. So what I have learned over the years is to work with the hormones of a spike, how you can avoid it. Let the orchid grow to the point of where the buds start separating from the spike. The hormones think they're going to bloom and will then start to gather themselves into the next phase of growth, because that's going to take another 6 weeks to 2 months before the hormones then activate that phase of growth. Meanwhile, the orchid is in bloom. All right. Do not, as you saw in my keiki example, do not cut the spikes off prematurely, because an orchid in stress is going to push a spike, COC, with the energy consumption. It is draining itself in the attempt to survive, all right? Unfortunately, in some very, very drastic cases, especially with twinkles, spikes take forever to form. Buds take forever to separate. We have to just watch and let it happen, because especially with some twinkles, they will produce another spike and we're back to square one, all right? Doesn't guarantee that the orchid will be safe, but the orchid is going to die if you let it bloom, all right? Now, my insolence, we'll just have to wait and see what is going to go on there. Now, let me just see if I've got all this right, because we are going to move on. I'm going to jump a point, but we'll get back to it. But while I've got Eonopsis popcorn haruri up, so I'm not flipping around with the images, I'm going to work straight and move straight into pollutants. Okay? These stress spikes came because of pollutants in the air, which will take an orchid down if we don't stop the influence of the pollutants in time. All right, if we are not aware of what we're doing, it'll take an orchid down. Remember the stomata? Remember the breathing? Yeah, that's what happened to my popcorn haruri. She responded so quickly. And then afterwards, I just decided to freeze and let my orchids live as best as possible without me putting my gas heater on. Thank you, Josh. Thank you so much. I hope that we have time afterwards, and I'll put it up on the screen for everybody. If not, it is going on a community post, with your permission, of course. So, signals of pollutants, something in the ambient air that is affecting your orchid's performance, is spikes disintegrating, as you can see with my popcorn haruri spike. That thing there, actually there were two even, and I was so surprised. My haruri blooming in winter. And then I was like, oh, what are you doing? Because the next thing is leaves blotching yellow. They are turning to brown, but they're not oozing, giving the appearance of possible sunburn. It looks like sunburn, but there was no influence of having had any sun, and yet the leaves look like they were having some form of sunburn. It can also be from artificial lights. It makes you feel like, oop, that was far too much light, and you think you've burnt the leaf. And then you need to see how the structures start to sort of fall in and amongst themselves, which you can see very clearly as you go down the spike to the bottom. That has all dried out. Yes, essential oils, and I'm getting to that as far as air fresheners are concerned in close proximity of the orchids. I don't know about essential oils that are like in a little tub that are just perfuming the air out of the fact that they are the perfume. But if you've got a diffuser, an air freshener, something that sort of triggers a motion sensor and it goes a little into the air every time you walk past it or in intervals, if that is either too close to the orchids, or let's say your fans gently go through and those chemicals happen to be in the air because they get picked up by the fans, they get deposited, all that can influence. It's a pollutant, yeah. So especially if you were to have, let's say, air fresheners, and if you're seeing something weird going on in a specific part of your collection, but it's not happening in the rest of the collection. You're seeing some leaves going yellow and they're not behaving right, but everything's fine, temperature's fine, the whole area is performing as it should, but there's one area doing a weird thing. You might want to check if you have an air freshener, some form of pollutant in the room. That will start to interfere with the breathing, the transpiration, respiration of the orchid, because, yikes, most air fresheners consist of formaldehyde, petrochemicals, aerosol pollutants. It's in the word itself. So all of these are a big, big no-no for our orchids, all right? Or if you grow in your bedroom and your husband sprays anything, deodorant, deodorant, perfume. My daughter once sent me an image while I was in the States, said, Mom, what's going on with my orchid? And I saw the blooms were blotchy, and she said, oh, it's this fungus. And I said, no. So I said to her, zoom in, give me close-up pictures. And it wasn't botrytis or anything. And I said, have you been, living room before you go out and you've got your orchid there? And she goes, yep, okay. All of those kinds of things. Everything like that. It's a pollutant, even though it's a nicely smelling one. Now, I'm going to go into ethylene toxicity as well. All right. While I was talking about gas heaters, I have a little primitive one, I'm not using it anymore. Orchids are more important, but let me get into this, because it doesn't necessarily have to happen when you don't have a gas heater and you think, oh, it doesn't apply to me. Hear me out. I even wrote this down because I don't want to mess it up. So even in small quantities, this gas can cause a kind of premature aging in blooms, okay? Hear me out. called sepal or petal wilt, which is associated primarily with cattleyas and their kind. When exposed to ethylene, sepals of newly opened flowers typically lose their substance, becoming somewhat transparent. I'm going somewhere with this, not just talking about blooms. But it's important because with blooms, if you have blooms, you can see the effect of ethylene toxicity, even though you're not necessarily with a gas heater, okay? Now, the reason I'm giving you these symptoms is so you can watch out what you need to be looking for when it comes to the leaves or possibly even roots. So, sepals of newly opened blooms typically lose their substance. That's one hint. Becoming somewhat transparent. That's another hint. Because both of these factors play a role when it comes to foliage or, let's say, roots. They will sort of become a little bit transparent, looking a little bit weird, like you think they're wet, but they're not. You haven't watered. Leaves are looking a little bit, what's wrong with you? Kind of thing where you're like, what is wrong with you? Mature fruit, very well said as well, yes. All right, so now only at extremely high concentrations and long durations does ethylene cause the plants themselves to react adversely. All right, the plants themselves, with the yellowing of the leaf likely being the result. But what is a long duration? Nobody puts a timestamp on that. So I'm going to tell you what happened to me in December of 2021 and then never again after I saw my popcorn Haruri do this. And I know this orchid looks healthy, but she looked much better. This is already her decline because you can see the damage that it has happened between December and when I took this image, it was February, okay? I had for 3 nights, I had the eater, try again, H, include the H. I had the gas heater on next to me facing away from the orchid, so it was facing me clearly because I wanted the heat. And my popcorn Haruri was maybe 3-4 meters away from me, not even, behind me hanging up, okay, hot air rises and all that fun stuff. And I had it on only for the duration while I was working at my desk, maybe 3-4 hours per night. So if we just say the maximum that I had it on was 4 times 3 is 12 hours. All right, now I'm giving you a time frame based on what I did and how quickly I saw this one orchid, thankfully, respond, and I panicked. And I don't know, I can't say that I saw any other damage on any other orchids, but I didn't want to let it come to that because I saw all I needed to see and the gas had to stop. So when we're talking about long duration, know that it took 12 hours for one orchid to show signals. That was enough for me, all right? Now, I am just going to say that once again, I was using a gas heater and everybody goes, yeah, gas heater, I wouldn't do that. Hear me out, okay? So other orchids that are highly susceptible to ethylene damage include many phalaenopsis and dendrobiums. Everything with regards to strong cuticles is a problem. They hate any kind of toxicity in the air. Dendrobiums hate anything toxic anyway, so they are in a league of their own, and that includes pesticides and fungicides. So I'm not surprised that dendrobiums are finicky about this, okay? Ethylene, how does this happen? Is generally present as a result of the incomplete combustion of a fuel, commonly from poorly ventilated or faulted heaters. All right, so never mind my little rollaway gas heater. Commonly from poorly ventilated or faulty heaters. Logically then, the more completely a machine can convert fuel into heat and energy, the less likely potential dangerous byproducts such as ethylene will be produced. This is why a number of new and more efficient heaters on the market today are safer to use for orchids. They emit less of such toxic gases by burning fuel more thoroughly than their predecessors. Okay, I'm just going to keep on reading because this is all pollutant stuff. Even so, All practical devices and not so practical personal habits which involve burning something, be it gas, natural gas, wood in a fireplace, or tobacco, should be eyed with suspicion when it comes to protecting orchids. The exhaust or smoke they give off should be kept as far away from the growing area as possible. Heaters should be used directly with the orchids that should be carefully investigated with the aid of those who own them or sell them to determine if they do indeed emit ethylene, and if they do, how it might be feasible to properly vent this offending gas. Yes, it does. Ripening fruit does produce ethylene. Normally an issue if you have orchids in the kitchen. But you see the importance of what I was saying and where I was getting at. I know I'm long-winded. Excuse me. I know I'm long-winded, but it doesn't mean just because I had a little roll-away gas heater that somebody's indoor built-in heater, radiator, whatever it is, maybe a little bit outdated and could be causing issues that otherwise we cannot determine, and we think maybe it's a lack of fertilizer, and then we give it a bit more fertilizer, and suddenly we've got, we've killed our roots because we've had excess fertilizer and all of that. I just wanted to create the awareness that you see how much clean air our orchids actually need. Now imagine if an orchid can't tolerate a gas heater burning next to it, yet human beings use their heaters, and these gases are leaking into the ambient air, and we are living in it. No wonder I'm loopy. No, I'm just kidding. Well, not about the loopy part, but I'm just saying. So pollutants are super important to be aware of. Even I was surprised back in the day that wood in a fireplace. Nice, cozy, toasty fire. And not necessarily in the grow space, but the fumes, just the fumes. So there we go. Right, so we can also go to my next point that I jumped over, right, Desiree? Right. I know. Dangers everywhere. So, but, awareness is the first step to overcoming all these things and not having to worry about them, just to know about it, And again, airflow, air exchange, everything goes hand in hand. Not doing anything, I may still lose my popcorn haruri because she can't recover in time during the warmer months of the year to be able to counteract the adverse conditions that she faces every winter. So I may still lose her, but she was like the gatekeeper, the eye opener, the window to the effects of pollutants in the air. And well, my other orchids survived and are doing okay. They never got to that point. So whatever happens to Popcorn Haruri, I'm fighting for her. Whatever happens to her, she will always be very close to my heart because she pulled the scale off of my eyes. My Popcorn Haruri would have died within a week. If I hadn't stopped what I did, within 3 days she was showing those signals after 12 hours of being exposed to fumes, and not 12 hours constantly. That's the thing. It was 3 nights in a row, let's say maximum 4 hours, accumulative 12 hours with plenty of time in between. She goes outside, gets fresh air, blah, blah, blah. And yet 3 days later, she was looking rough and producing spikes like crazy. And because she knew she was going downhill, I had yet to find out. And it took me until February to do so. But she had already lost those growths within 2 months. But she would have been completely keeled over, probably without being able to photosynthesize, no sufficient leaves to do anything recovery, without the light, without the temperatures. She'd have been gone in 5 days. I kid you not. So I hope that I didn't speak too fast and you got a good idea about the time frame. All right. Now, okay, ethylene gas is on the higher spectrum of a very toxic pollutant that can do damage to orchids. Now, with air fresheners, everything like that, It's just to create awareness if you see something odd happening in your collection. It's not like the air fresheners going out, pew, 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 out there targeting your orchids and going to take them down. But long term, if something isn't addressed or something doesn't make sense, it can happen, all right? So we did jump the systemic insecticides and fungicides. In this one, I want to make sure that we are fully aware of, let's just say, prevention is better than cure. Systemic meaning the systemic should be in the orchid so that an outbreak of a pest or a fungus doesn't even occur. And if it does, it's quickly dealt with because the pest, the fungus, can't settle in and the pest will die the moment it takes a bite out of the orchid. It doesn't always work that way though, and there's one genus that I'm always wary of and suspicious of, and that is dendrobiums. They hate anything and everything that is synthetic. Any kind of chemical. Dendrobiums will look at you and they will shrivel up their leaves, chuck them all off, and then they'll sulk for years. No matter what you did, you're just trying to protect it from some kind of a pest, and you didn't even overdose, you didn't take the concentration too high. Dendrobiums have a problem. If there's anything I can say about making sure an orchid doesn't die, well, I've got two factors, but do not let dendrobiums come in contact with anything industrial, commercial, chemical, systemic. Keep that far away from them, because the first thing that will do is just drop their leaves, and then good luck, no photosynthesis, good luck with them being able to do what the roots are supposed to be doing. The roots will not dry out because they've got nowhere to go with whatever uptake they're trying to do. Dendrobiums are tough. Yes, we know they will grow new growths eventually, but in the meantime, oh boy, the headache. So my best advice when it comes to saving your dendrobiums, other orchids are tougher and they will do very well with systemics, but dendrobiums, keep them on a DIY home thing kind of treatment regimen. Keep your eye on them. Like I said earlier, the cheapest weapon we have against pests and anything is our vigilance. And then if necessary, use alcohol. If necessary, a little bit of hydrogen peroxide if there's mold around the media surface. Or if you have maybe a fungus developing, use garlic infused water as an organic fungicide. And that is also a recipe I have in my garlic alcohol video. I have the option of garlic infused water as a fungicide for dendrobiums, because I was going nuts with dendrobiums, trying to keep them protected from dying on things. They are tough for you, yes, that's great. And I hope it stays that way. And if you ever have any issues, just know, do not address them. Do not even come close to them. If you are spraying for a pest in the vicinity, if you've got a hibiscus, you want to get rid of the aphids, or if you've got some other kind of a honeysuckle that's driving you mad with something, whatever it is, if your dendrobiums are in that vicinity and you decide to put a systemic sprayer, or if your gardener, not your gardener, but your neighbor sprays a systemic and some of that spills over the fence onto your dendrobiums, they're not going to hate you, but you're going to feel as if they do. All right, so that's one of the things that is super, super important to keep that in mind with regards to dendrobiums. Now, also different countries and different territories have permissions according to what products that are effective. Here in Europe, our best course of action is to avoid any possible influences, even to have anything for fungi or bacteria. Goodness me, if a pest takes hold, you're on your own, because whatever products we have on our shelves, they're pretty much useless, at least the ones I can source here in Spain, okay? And I'm not the kind of person to try and get something through the mail that's not allowed here, even if I could buy it off Amazon, the UK. I don't dare do that, okay? Now, with the garlic water, I have been pretty successful. I know it takes a lot more application, repeat applications. It's more tedious. yes, you've got to be more on top of it, and systemics are so much easier, and literally they will nuke the, if you don't have a systemic, if you didn't make a preventative treatment, one of these products from the United States will absolutely nuke the pests, and you're happy walking off into the sunset and you've dealt with the problem. That is not the case here in Europe. So, excuse me, whatever substance that you use to counteract your pests, a repeat application is a must if they are weaker. Okay, so let me just say here, let me just check my notes. Oh, and boy, all right, what I'm going to do is, because I did do a link, I love St. Augustine Orchid Society. I love this page so much. So I'm going to share this link with you for orchid disease control, because you guys in the United States, you've got the arms. I mean, you've got the warships at the ready at your fingertips, and they have a fabulous, fabulous structure of what to use for what, and etc. And my goodness, it's like, what has my orchid got? Let me see what it says on this page. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, I'm going to go to Home Depot, and we're done. So I put that link in there for everybody to have a look at, no matter where you are and what part of the world you're at. Maybe with the products there, you can see the active ingredient and find something similar in your territory, maybe at a lesser concentration, something that's allowed. But this page, oh, I love it. Absolutely love it, even though I can't buy any of the products there. But there you go. I thought that was super interesting. But here in good old Spain, I use garlic alcohol. I use garlic infused water. If there is a threat somewhere with bacterial rot, something like that, I go at it with hydrogen peroxide 3%, throw in some cinnamon and or dragon's blood. Or if you don't have dragon's blood available, I have tested iodine. Yep, plain simple iodine as a replacement for dragon's blood. No need to go with the expensive variety. Go to your pharmacy, get yourself some iodine. Same thing, except dragon's blood is red, iodine is yellow. You are very welcome, Andy Land. I love that place, St. Orchid Society. If I had known back then while I was in Florida and I was down in Ponte Vedra, while I was there in and I was in St. Augustine even further down. I know, right, Robbie? It's awesome. So I would have loved to have said hello, just walked into the premises, even if they're not expecting anybody. I'm here. By the way, I love your page. And then be out the door, probably bright red. Anyway, like I said, if I could only get my hands on some of these products, Bob's my uncle, I assure you of that. I'd be skipping off into the sunset, off into the beach, into the riptide. Okie dokie. So we've done that. We did jump the thing. Oh, by the way, yes. Oh, I have to say that. There you go. You're welcome, Michelle. By the way, excuse me. I have to say that we have in the St. Augustine Society page there, they do talk about copper-based fungicides. And please, let me tell you something. I have used copper-based fungicide with my orchids against funguses many years with a lot of success. Okay? I have had 1 year where I did a massive boo-boo, and it has knocked my confidence out the window, pulled the rug out from under my feet. I am not touching copper anymore because I've lost all my vandas. I have probably recovered my Epidendrum stamfordianum. Probably, not going to, jinx it, but I have lost orchids, and I thought I could pull them through, and some orchids took 2 years to die. And I would never on my channel ever recommend copper ever again. And I remember that there was somebody after I said I did a copper fungicide thing, blah, blah, blah. And I remember somebody commented under there and said, your orchids are going to die. And I was like, oh, hello, welcome to my channel. I've never seen you before, but you know, okay, it was one of the earlier videos in 2020 or I don't know. Anyway, but you know, that was like there was no introduction. It was just like, oh, you use copper on your orchids are gonna die. I was like, all right, welcome to YouTube. You know, and in my head, I'm like, I've used copper for years. Everything's going to be fine. Blah, blah, blah. Oh boy. I don't know under which video it was anymore, but if I would find that name, I would actually thank them and tell them I was forewarned, and they were right, with the exception of my Epidendrum stamfordianum and one more that I can't remember right now. Yeah, I think we've got that one still at home. But no more vandas on the patio of Ninja Orchids, not bare root ones anymore. Anyhow, that is my copper experience. Fran Ricks, it is good to see you. Welcome. You have given up on dendrobiums? I would like to know why. You cannot throw me that bone. And if you've been throughout the live, you will have maybe heard me say, I need to know why. I am the kind of person that gives the why. That means, you know, it's a mirror. I have to give whys. I can't just give a list of don'ts and then be done with it. And you can't put that in the, you can't. You have to tell me why you've given up on dens. But anyway, it is good to see you. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Right, so yeah, my channel will never recommend copper. That is personal. I will never, ever tell somebody their orchid is going to die if they use copper. I will warn them based on my experiences, but St. Augustine Orchid Society has copper fungicide on this page. I wanted just to clear that up. And if I were in the US, I could get my hands on these products. I would use the copper-based fungicide as well without any hesitation whatsoever. Just to make that clear, because if you followed my channels, you will, oh, I'm giving away a secret there. If you follow my channel, you will probably know, and then you'll read that, and then you'll think, oh, hey now. So that clears that part up. Excuse me while I have some Maji Baridi. And if you remember what that was from earlier in the live, I love you, because that means you were there back then and you're still here. All right, so we are moving on to point number 13, rot. We can go through it very quickly, but if we are pressed for time, you know, we can fall into the rut of using the same jargon over and over and over again. And it sounds like I'm saying this word again. So the other day I Googled, what is rot? And I came upon an article. I didn't even save the link, but I just thought, you know, go back to the basics. What is rot? So please, can I read this text that I took verbatim about bacteria before we get into the details? Maybe we don't even have to expand on the details of rot after I've read this, but I copied and pasted it because it's so well written. And now, put yourself in my head. Scary place, but it can be fun sometimes. With a little imagination, this can be quite gory. So still, I had to chuckle when I read it in my head and thought, if I could read it out loud the same way I read it in my head, then maybe you can have a chuckle as well. And for future reference, have it that way. Should you need to tackle rot in your collection, maybe the way I bring this text across to you will stay in your mind, and you can tackle the rot with a chuckle as well. I don't know. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to take advantage. I have a 13-second time lag. I'm going to read this to you, and welcome to the mental head of Nina when she reads text. I know. If you're going to put me in a straitjacket, make sure that it is Versace, or I'm not coming with you. All right, moving on. What is rot? Or let's talk about the origin of rot. There are many ways in which a plant can become infected by a bacterial soft rot. They can be host to the bacteria either by being infected as seed or from direct inoculation into wounds or natural openings like stomata in mature plants, which is most common. But when a plant is infected and the conditions are favorable, the bacteria immediately begin feeding on liquids released from injured cells and start replicating. As they replicate, they release more and more pectolytic enzymes that degrade and break down cell walls. And because of the high turgor pressure within the cells, these macerations effectively causes the cells to explode and die, providing more food for the bacteria. As they gorge on intracellular fluid, the bacteria continue to multiply and move into the intercellular spaces with their cell wall degrading enzymes ahead of them, preparing the plant tissue for digestion. Often the epidermis is left unscathed, keeping the rotten flesh contained within until a crack allows the ooze to leak out and infect others around it. Ew! End of quote. I'm sorry. There you go. That is what bacteria does inside, let's say, a cinnamon, and how it doesn't burst until, what was that word again? The high turgor pressure within the cells causes the maceration effectively to explode. Oh my goodness. Honestly, when I read this, honestly, I kid you not, when I read this the first time, this is how my mind was interpreting this text. And I thought, I don't know when I'm going to use this. I have no idea when I'm going to use this, but I had to copy and paste it. Excuse me just one moment. I've got to cough. Orchid growing is not for the faint-hearted. If you read this, I just wanted to have a simple understanding of what is rot. Maybe find some new words that I can use without repeating myself. And I come across this because, of course, what is rot? It all starts with bacteria. And this is what happens. So, what can we take out of this text apart from something that is awful, yuck, smelly, and gross? Well, next time you look at something that's rotting, I hope you remember this little interlude and say, well, hey, I know what's going on in there. I'm going to deal with it. But what can we take out of it? Look, I will go back to my example of Nuba back in the day where I thought, I don't know what happened to that orchid. To this day, it baffles me. I have no idea why she just collapsed on me after growing so well. And in this text, it kind of gives me an answer. I was like, the plant can come infected by a bacterial soft rot. They can be host to the bacteria either by being infected as seed, coming in from the wounds, natural openings like stomata in mature plants, which is most common. Our orchids breathe and they open stomata every night, every day. And that is where bacteria come in. It is not always a problem that we have done, something that we caused for an orchid to incur rot. I'm somewhat understanding a little bit what happened with my Nube, and I have to say that she was growing so well. Her stomata were wide open. We had happy sap. Everything was fabulous. And boom, enter the bacteria because she was not exactly strong enough at that time. And I guess, took the orchid down. So take heart. If you've got rot, don't worry about it. Worry about it enough if you feel like you need to get rid of it. Do not confuse rot with an older structure that will just decline and decay anyway. An older structure can incur rot if, for example, a pest gets in there and starts to make everything ooze and nasty. You want to take older structures away sooner rather than later, then that's fine. I like to leave an older structure on for as long as possible, simply because, you know, I'm a little bit of a renegade. I like to observe things. I like to understand how long it takes for an older structure to be absorbed to the point where it's just like, you know, just cells, membrane left of nothing, fiber. But you have to be very, very on top of your orchids to watch an older structure decline and make sure that you know what you're looking at, to be on the safe side that the yellowing is actually old, decline, degrading, as opposed to the yellowing is yuck, that's got to go now. And make sure that if you cut your anything old, degrading, or yellowing and soft, that you do not cut into the place where it oozes to leak out and infect others around it. Make sure you cut clean. And if you can't cut clean, make sure that you sterilize your tools in between every single cut. Personally, I like to use bleach. Okay, I don't want to have anything to wait around while I'm messing around with something that's rotting, like alcohol. Alcohol in its wet form does not sterilize. It has to evaporate. The evaporating process brings out the sterilization. So make sure that you don't cut and think, oh, it's the same orchid, I'm going to cut again. Excuse me, just one moment. Whoops, I almost sneezed us out of the stream. Wouldn't that have been a giggle? Anyway, make sure that you please cut with a sterilized cutting tool every single cut when you're dealing with something, whether it's aging, you're not sure if it's rotted, just go on the safe side, pretend it's rotting, and keep every cut sterilized. I don't know if I mentioned before the sneeze or whatever, do not use wet alcohol that is not sterilized. Alcohol, when it evaporates, makes the sterilization process complete. Like I said, I use bleach. I can just dip my tool into the bleach and then cut into the orchid again, dip again, and it just keeps sterilizing, okay? Right. How do we avoid rot from happening? With all the points we've mentioned before, with plenty of airflow depending on your temperature, reducing airflow at night if your temperatures drop, reducing humidity, reducing airflow with humidity, keeping your orchids nice and dry as they go to bed, especially always in relation to temperature. When it's a beautiful sunny day, not just day, when I say sunny day, even indoors, it's nice and warm and toasty. Normally, that doesn't happen. Rot is not the problem unless you get water into something that is a new growth. Twinkle! Tiny little structures. But yeah, that's how rot happens. Fusarium, I have included into rot because it will cause rot because of how it weakens all the new growths, no matter how well we have cared for the orchid. If an orchid is infected with fusarium, and the fusarium takes hold, and you don't know what you're looking for. You think your orchid is rotting, your new growths are going black, you think you haven't given it enough calcium. Unfortunately, sometimes with more symptoms of fusarium, also spotting on the roots are blackening, the root tips are stopping to grow, also black root tips. That doesn't mean it's fertilizer burn. Plenty of symptoms about fusarium that have to play a part. And if in doubt, cut into the rhizome and check for that. Well, one of my favorite colors, but not when it comes to orchid rhizomes, purple. Okay, so I've included fusarium. It is a fungicide. It could have been with the fungicides and the insecticides, but for me, fusarium is a rot inducer. The first thing we see is rot or something wrong with the roots. That is our diagnosing starting point if we don't see anything else. So that's why I've included fusarium in this category. If you have any questions about fusarium, I have a playlist all about fusarium on the channel, so you can have a look there. I would direct you there straight away. It is so much faster than me going through it. I may just have to, well, no, it's not my text, but I do love that How do we get rot via the bacteria? Okay, we can end tonight on point 14. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. I so appreciate you. We can end tonight on one factor that will also take an orchid down, although it will take a long time if you want it to take a long time. That is entirely up to you, or you can just take a flamethrower to it and be done with it. You will not be watching the decline of your orchid, and that is because of a virus, okay? Now, just like with Fusarium, and the bacteria that can cause rot, even though orchids are known to be able to live happily with a virus, unbeknownst to us, eventually something happens, and again something weakens the plant, and that is the activate button for the virus to start its thing. You see, anything and everything that we've been talking about can become a problem when an orchid is weak. So yeah, watch out for the little seedlings, okay? So there's virus can start its thing as well. There's Fusarium on a weak orchid, and the best solution is just to sayonara and torch it and be done with it. But I don't do that on my channel. I actually have my CG rolling still to this day. While I don't bring her inside, she is a virused orchid. And I thought, the Mysticida has been doing such a fabulous job for so long. Let's change the color a little bit. Seeing as we're here right now, why not change the color? And I'll show you what I mean, because I can be talking about certain things. Let me see, are we on? Are we on air? I feel like hello. I was just going to say, I feel like a screen DJ, and then suddenly I click the wrong thing. All right. CG rolling. Beautiful orchid, but she's virused. And the thing is that you don't have to get a virus kit unless, you think that, you want to find out sooner rather than later, because orchids will show you symptoms. It just takes a long time, once again, to be able to diagnose an orchid with a virus. Once you've had your orchid a little bit longer, you've had some fantastic blooms out of her year after year after year. And then, of course, you have some conditions that are not ideal. You don't like them. And clearly, the orchid didn't like them. So the first sign that you see are deformed blooms. That's the biggest, most fastest symptom, is that there's something very wrong with the orchid when the blooms are deformed. And usually we can pinpoint a virus because petal sepals are fused, things are just out of whack, and usually the color will also break. You can also see that the tissue isn't working properly, and in this video you also see that the bud was having difficulty to come through the sheath, even though this orchid has never had these issues in the past, all right? So I'm listing symptoms over a course of several months for a blooming like this to appear after an orchid has had a history of being unproblematic, reliable bloomer, great grower, all right? None of the conditions changed with the exception of mice of winter to spring of 21 and 22, when certain conditions couldn't be provided for anymore. There you see how the bloom should look, and imagine my surprise, of course, when it came out that way in 2022. However, now, that doesn't quite determine a virus, but it sets the alarm bells going, because now you're thinking, yeah, the conditions weren't great, the light levels were low, it was too cold, so let's wait for the next blooming. And this is why I'm saying, if you see something like this and you're not comfortable whatsoever, and you're not going to invest in a virus kit, toss the orchid, because chances are something is horribly wrong. Because the next blooming obviously will take another 10 or 12 months, meaning that if you have an infected orchid in your collection, viruses as such don't spread, but if an insect takes a bite out of them and then does a little migration over to its neighbor and takes a bite out of that one, boom, the next one has a virus as well, even though it could be super strong. So my CG Roebling clearly lived happily with the virus for the longest time, as did my golden cello with Fusarium, and I was totally unaware of it. Enter adverse conditions, the orchid starts to weaken, even though visually her foliage looks marvelous and great, but The weakening process has started, something that we cannot determine by our eyes, and the blooms are the first giveaway, the first telltale. If you want, you can wait for the second blooming with better conditions. Make sure that all the things have changed. Make sure that everything is exactly the same as it was in the first years where their blooming was fantastic. So you have a comparison. And if nothing has changed, everything is the same, as in my case throughout the summer months, another beautiful new growth. I was hopeful the next blooming would be perfect. Boy, was I wrong. By that time, the orchid has also shown symptoms where I say they are like apparitions. You think that there was a scale, like some kind of scale damage. I call them apparitions because they just seem to happen to appear for no reason. And there they are. And they're very pale. And it looks like some scale took a bite out and left its mark. Whereas this orchid had never had a scale problem up to when it got weak. And then the virus started its thing. Now I have to watch out that this orchid doesn't get scale, all right? But these white markings and little circular blotches appeared, and then a sunburn kind of thingy appeared as well. But my orchid is not exposed to sun because where she lives all year round, well, during the warmer months of the year, she's right bang smack behind a curtain that is always down. She gets bright shade. So if there's a brown mark that doesn't have the indentations, Joseph, it's good to see you. Hey, thank you for being here. Estoy muy bien, muchas gracias. So if you see brown markings that have no indentations, you see brown markings, and there's no reason that there should be a sunburn because the sun hasn't even touched that leaf. So you can see how I'm building layer of a layer of a layer in trying to diagnose an orchid with a virus. Now, she can continue living happily in my collection with a virus, but she's a danger to the rest of my collection. We'll see how she fares with the conditions outside because she is not coming inside. I am not doing that. But I'm not ready to toss her either because I'm watching her. I'm interested now. I know my CG rolling is doomed, but I'm kind of watching her now. And I don't know, maybe there's something we can learn from this experience on the channel. But know that a virus will take an orchid down. It can take 8 years. She will continue to grow, but bit by bit, everything is going to just peter out, you know? It's no point keeping an orchid that doesn't do well in a collection, especially if she's infected. All right, what do we got here? Michelle Fucarino, my supermarket, no ID fell, just bloomed 2 spikes, just 1 flower, had 9 petals, just 1 flower, had 9 petals and sepals plus 1 lip. Does that mean the virus or possibly overbred? I would say that is overbred. 9 petals and sepals plus 1 lip. Maybe it's got, wow. I think that is overbred. As long as the petals are not fused, and maybe it's pyloric. Maybe some of those petals actually are trying to pretend they are a lip. Woo! Send me pictures. I'm greedy like that. Send me pictures. I'd like to know. It's good to see you here, Jose. It is so good to see you. One day I would love to have you as a guest. I would love to show everybody what you can do and the mounts that you make. But please, no pressure. I don't want to expose you. Like the Siamese bloom. Yeah, she is a beauty, Sandy, and she smells so gorgeous. She's fragrant beyond belief. It's just delicious. And her span, you know, my hand, when I go pinky thumb and I extend it like that, that's 20 centimeters, and she easily covers that. It's just amazing. But yeah, so virus kit or flamethrower, that's the decision. I'm keeping mine because I think we can learn something and we can kind of follow the demise of an orchid. Not that I like it, but you know, hey, like I always said, if I didn't have my channel, she would probably be gone, but there's a reason that I have a channel and we might as well study and observe together. Dania Totelli says, my region, Lombardia, is the most polluted. Oh, wow. I didn't know that. I don't want to call any countries out. But I would have thought there were other countries that were worse. Danya, I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope you're okay, though, health-wise. I hope it's not affecting you. So, right, we have been going 2 hours and 40 minutes. How are you guys doing? How are you holding up? Everybody okay? There's Mr. City Eye again. So that is my 14 points. I can't believe we just did that. I cannot believe we just did that. I'm not saying this is a marathon, but it's 3:10 in the morning and I'm yapping about orchids as if it was early afternoon. Crazy, crazy. Tomorrow I'm going to be a duvet burrito on Sunday morning. And I hope nobody clangs that flipping gate. I can't edit that sound out in the mornings. I can try and edit it out of the videos. When that gate goes, my bedroom terrace is facing that flipping gate, and when it clangs, oh boy, I want to throw some things over the hedge. Oh my goodness. Anyway, I am not going to rush this to finish it. I just want to make sure that I have covered some questions. If any new ones arise, always feel free to drop me a comment in or under the video if you have any information that you've been thinking of and something has percolated in your head while this video processes when it goes live, because I do want the chat to be included, especially with the links that we've been dropping. But you know, if something's percolated, come back, revisit the video and put it into the comments, and then we can continue the dialogue there, or even do a part 2, like a follow-up based on everybody's input, etc. Yes. Oh, St. Augustine, I would poke there with you. We not just in the pages and discuss everything, but you know, go and have a coffee in Florida in St. Augustine. Sheila Broad, thank you so much for being here. 9:10 p.m. on a Saturday night, and you're here. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm glad that it was informative, and most importantly, that it was fun. Night, night. And I think that was a good closing little speech, with the exception, if there's nothing further, then I'm just going to say good morning from southern Spain. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of your evening. If you're watching on replay, I thank you so much for the support and that you rewatched. Know that I appreciate it a lot, much needed. Make sure though that whatever it is that you do, that you stay safe. You take care. Bye.